Greetings from the Idiot Box. I'm Allison Lips. Thank you for joining me for the first solo show. I figured this was the perfect opportunity to talk more about why I'm qualified to host this podcast and call myself a TV historian. I know that this has the possibility to sound like a one-sided job interview. I'm going to do my best to avoid that. As most of you listening to this podcast, I grew up watching TV from a very young age. Some of my first memories are waking up early on Saturday morning, sneaking into my parents' bedroom. They slept to Nick at Night, and I would watch Mr. Wizard and then go downstairs to watch Double Dare. It's always fascinated me how I grew up with Mr. Wizard, and if you know me, I'm a huge David Letterman fan. So did Letterman. And Mr. Wizard was actually the first guest on his show. So that is just a bit of how I understand that my time with television was influenced by the time that came before us. And I knew that before I decided to major for undergrad at Rowan University in radio, TV, film, and journalism. While my television degree is in production, which I know it's been a rough few podcasts. Thank you for sticking with me. I am in the process of upgrading my equipment and making this look better, but I discovered that production wasn't my passion at the time. So I went into marketing. I graduated with an MBA in marketing and marketing research at Rutgers University. But while I was there, I realized that my true passion is television and the media. So my research focused on streaming, even though the program was intended for those going into pharma marketing. I then was privileged to teach television history of the 60s and the 70s at Rowan University. It was a lot of what was going on in the 60s, so the civil rights movement, as well as Mary Tyler Moore, the Bob Newhart Show, the Jeffersons, and of course, JFK, Martin Luther King. You get the point. I'm happy to talk about that with you, whether it's in the Facebook group or you want to reach out to me. And now I've mentioned this before. I find myself in the odd position of going for a master's in television studies at Rowan University. And some of my classmates could have been my students. Awkward. Fortunately, that hasn't been the case, and everyone's been super supportive. Now, I've been focusing instead of on streaming, more on how we interact with television and what that says about society. Last semester, I did some research on Star Trek as well as on Kids in the Hall, which is another show that I love with Dave Foley and I, Mark McCullough, and I did an entire paper on Buddy Cole, who is played by Scott Thompson, and his quest to educate his young protege on Toronto's gay history. And that's been really enjoyable. I know it's a little bit different from what most people think of with television, but I am more than a fan, and I'm also more than an academic. In academia, we have a whole bunch of jargon. We would call this an ACA-fan, which stands for academic and fan. But I like to consider myself more involved with television than the average person. I don't believe you need an education at least a formal education to fully understand television and how it impacts us. Obviously, that's the route I have chosen. I hope to go for a PhD and continue my studies while I teach, since I need a PhD in order to teach full time at the university level. So I have at least 5, 6 years ahead of me, maybe more. We'll see. While I am doing this podcast, mainly to keep the schedule, I want to make sure that you guys know that we will have a consistent schedule at GFIB. I also want to talk about some of the things that I am watching now. We don't often get the chance to talk about it because we have topics, and I try to make sure our guests stay on topic. But right now, I'm watching, as far as new shows or newest shows, I'm watching The Night Court Revival, St. Denis Medical, Going Dutch, Ghosts, and Sex Lives of College Girls. I am a huge Night Court fan. I love John Larroquette, especially when he's playing Dan Fielding. If anyone wants to come on the show and talk about Night Court, please let me know, because I find it fascinating how the writers had the foresight to have Dan Fielding grow up. In the original, he's chasing skirts. In the new one, he's protective of Abby, who is the original Judge Stone's daughter. And that was something that I was not expecting the first time I watched the show. Granted, the Night Court Revival is not the best show in the world, but if you like the original, it stays in that vein, and I think it's worth watching if you need a light, fluffy sitcom before you go to bed. I've also been watching St. Denis Medical, which is a mockumentary, but it doesn't feel like the typical mockumentary to me. There's a lot of Scrubs influence, and it's a show that you're either going to love or you're going to find it a waste of time. Actually, that's most shows. I've also been watching Going Dutch just because I find Dennis Leary strangely compelling. I know that a lot of you Mitch Hedberg fans would probably say that Dennis Leary stole his act. I'm not going to go into that here, but I do want to acknowledge you. And yes, I understand completely. I've also been watching Ghosts and the Sex Lives of College Girls. Ghosts is based on the British version. Hopefully, in a future episode, we will compare the British and the American version, as well as the recently announced German version. That also depends on if there is English subtitles on that, but I'm planning on revisiting Ghosts. As far as shows that have been on, but I didn't get to watch them the first time around, I've been catching up on Better Call Saul because I just finished Breaking Bad. I'm about halfway through with Better Call Saul. Malcolm in the Middle and Mr. Show are also on that list. As you can see, anyone tangentially related to the Breaking Bad universe, I am watching their other shows. Mr. Show is probably not so surprising after listening to the Lookwell episode, because I am a Conan O'Brien fan and Bob Odenkirk wrote for Conan towards the beginning. And right now on my to watch list is Homicide: Life on the Street, because I am in the middle of the semester right now. Well, actually, the beginning of the semester. I also have to make sure that I have enough time to watch the shows that are relevant to school. And as one of my professors who's from Britain says it's a well, British people would say this to begin with. It's a bit of a busman's holiday. I spend a lot of time watching TV, and not all of that is relaxing these days. Um, it's enjoyable, but not everything enjoyable is turn off your mind and just chill. And now that we've covered what I have been watching, let's take a look at how I got to these shows. Like, what are my favorite shows? I don't think many of you know that. Some of the shows that I return to over and over again are Hogan's Heroes, The Nanny, Just Shoot Me, News Radio, Newhart, Night Court. I love a good sitcom. A lot of these are basically live action cartoons. I'm aware of that. I like the silly. I also love the original Law and Order, not the original Law and Order revival, just the first 20 seasons, particularly those that had McCoy and Briscoe. And while he was on SVU, I love me some Munch. SVU is a show that, due to its evolution, I no longer enjoy, but the early seasons until probably about like 18, 19, when Rafael Barba, Raul Esparza left, were episodes that I guess I could say like are classic for me. And outside of American television, I watch a lot of British and Australian TV. And I love, for those of you into British TV, Yes Minister, which is about the government and its bureaucracy, and Drop the Dead Donkey. Those are both sitcoms. Also, Britain is known for its panel shows, so QI and Would I Lie to You are also shows I watch. Not as into them as some of the other shows, but I would recommend watching Reggie Perrin, where Martin Clunes plays Reggie Perrin and hates his bosses. I also have mentioned Ghosts. And moving to my Australian TV, I tend to watch Australian panel shows more than sitcoms or dramas. I love Sean McAuliffe and Talking About Your Generation, which pit three generations. In the original, it was X, Y, which are also millennials, and Z. That's not the original. That was the revival. The original had boomers, X, and Y, or the millennials, against each other, answering pop culture questions and participating in ridiculous stunts, kind of like Beat the Clock or maybe some of the Double Dare physical challenges. It's definitely an Australian show. I totally recommend that if you can find it online. Rune, which brings my marketing and my television loves together and has people from the Australian advertising industry talk about ads from around the world. It airs on the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, not to be confused with ABC. The is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. And it's a show that shouldn't exist. but it ends up being really funny and really educational. So just check it out, especially with Australia. The censorship is less strict. So there are some swearing in the advertising that you would not expect because we have the Dollar Shave Club commercials, which the entire joke is that the CEO keeps getting bleeped. I've also enjoyed Danger Five. That is an extremely weird show, which is part of the reason why I adore it. It's a lot, though. It's got a military force with 5 people. It just consists of 5 people, apparently, from around the world. It's got Nazis who have dinosaurs that they control. And it takes place first in the 50s, then in the 60s. No, I don't know. There's no time travel. It's just, you have to watch it to believe it because if I told you anymore, you'd think I'd completely lost it when in fact it is the creator of the show who apparently loved pulp sci-fi novels and comics so much that he created this show. Just go watch it. That's all I can say. And I really don't have that much else to say. I can go on and on and on, but I don't think any of us really want that. I do want to say that if you want to reach out to me, and please do, the email for this show is greetingsfromtheidiotbox at gmail.com. So the name of this podcast, it's Greeting from the Idiot Box, and it's a Gmail address for now. And thanks for listening. I'm Allison Lips, and don't forget to join me next week when I have a guest again. Bye. Hi, everyone. As I was editing this, I realized I misspoke in a few places. The first one is that Mr. Wizard was not the first guest on Late Night with David Letterman. He was, however, on the first episode and did some experiments with Dave. Still pretty cool. Also, the kids in the hall, I combined Bruce McCullough with Mark McKinney. The kids in the hall are Dave Foley, Scott Thompson, Bruce McCullough, Dave. Wow! Okay, let's try this again. The kids in the hall are Dave Foley, Bruce McCullough, Kevin McDonald, Mark McKinney, and Scott Thompson. Yeah, we're we're gonna go with that. Thank you for listening and bearing with me again as I am stumbling through the process of making this podcast the best it can be. Again, till next time, thank you for listening, and I'm Allison Lips, and this has been Greetings from the Idiot Box.